Today on the podcast, I'm talking with Japan Times sports writer Jason Coskrey about moving to Japan to write about sports. I thought it was fascinating to hear that immersion was critical not only for learning Japanese, but also learning how to do sports writing. So I hope you enjoy. Jason Coskrey is a sports writer for the Japan Times. He previously worked at the Birmingham Post Herald and the Marietta Daily Journal before moving to Japan in 2007. He's also someone I've been following on Twitter for over 10 years, and I've enjoyed his posts, but don't know very much about your Japan experience and Japanese experience, so I'm looking forward to talking. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
So I'm starting with everyone pretty broadly this year. How have you studied Japanese so far, and what has your study experience been like?
My study experience, I guess I would say it's been a lot of like literally by experience of being introduced to Japanese, because before I came here I'd taken one class in college which didn't really teach me. It taught me a lot. I can't say it didn't teach me anything, but it pretty much taught me like hiragana and stuff like that. And I came here, I was just inundated with things that I didn't know and couldn't read, and going to games that first year was just tough. And so I think it was just more by experience. I would go to games and ask people, what does this mean? What does that mean? I had a really, like, I guess you could almost call him a mentor, like Wayne Grazik. He was in Japan. He had been here for, I think by that time, maybe 40 or so years. And he always was at the Yomiuri Giants games. He did work for NTV. He wrote for the Japan Times some. And I'd always sit with Wayne. And Wayne used to have to read the names off the scoreboard for me. And so it was really just getting introduced to Japanese, because as I see player names, I'd start learning the kanjis for those names. And as I see other things, I'd start learning, oh, this is what this means. This is what that means. And eventually I went out and because it was pretty difficult to cover games and I could only talk to the foreign players. So eventually I decided to take some formal classes, and I went to Meguro Language Center, which was a place I really loved going, and I went there for a while. I actually went back there last year. Year before last, I went back to do some more study there, but I really liked their classes and they really helped me a lot. And then it was mostly just kind of immersion, hearing something, not knowing what it was, and either asking somebody or looking up and finding it and I guess remembering it. So it was just kind of first off getting thrown in the deep end, second off trying to learn some stuff on my own, and now it's just kind of a mix of both.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, immersion really is. I mean, it's funny. I think no matter how many classroom courses you take, I think immersion really still is the key. Like, you've got to kind of go over, which is so hard to say right now because no one can go over from the U.S. obviously, or anywhere, I think. But the university course, was that like a semester or a year-long course? Do you remember?
It was just a semester course. Like I said, it taught me the basics, and I think it really did help, because I came here, at least I could read hiragana and katakana. Yeah. And some kanji, and I could speak. I really couldn't speak much, but it did help some.
Nice.
But of course, you get here and you realize people don't speak the way they do in the textbooks, and I do remember one of the first times I spoke to a player, and I got in the textbook, gone through everything, and wrote my sentence out and went up to him, and he just started saying just the most alien thing to me I've ever heard. I don't know what he said at all. And I'm just nodding, and he's just speeding along. And I'm like, all right, yeah, people don't talk the way they do in the textbooks, or as slow as they do on the tapes.
Sure. Were you recording when you were doing that interview?
Oh yeah, and I just I just let someone else listen to it and tell me what he said at that time, because it was rough.
And so, but you've gotten to the point where you can like listen to transcripts now and of recordings of interviews.
Yeah, now I can, and there are still some times I get tripped up now too.
Sure.
I wish I was better than I actually am, but yeah, I can look at it, and basically, if I'm looking at a game on television, or if I'm at a game that I'm not covering, when there's no real pressure, obviously, I can listen to them without a transcript and just all right, I know what he said. It's just mostly when I'm writing something down, I want to make sure I get it right and I get the
Sure.
tone right. And there's so many, as you know, there's so many little pitfalls that you can't see,
Hmm.
where something could mean something completely different. So in those instances, I use a transcript. And if I'm really really stuck, I just ask somebody.
Yeah. I mean, that seems like incredible, like on the job training too, like on the job language training, like being forced to kind of go through transcripts, listen to them over and over again until you get whatever word that you're missing, and are able to fill it in and ask questions. I remember I was listening to really closely to one of the NHK transcripts about the Capitol Hill riots, basically on January 6th, and I had to ask some people on Twitter for a couple of things because it's tough. But for the Megaro classes, what kind of textbooks were they using? I'm always curious to hear what kind of textbooks people use.
The first time I went, they were using Japanese for busy people.
Okay.
I forget which I think it was the yellow or the red one. And when I went recently, I forgot. It's a white book with green on it, kanji something or other. I'm sorry, I forget what the
No,
name
no
was.
worries. Yeah,
I have it somewhere. I just forgot what it was called.
sure. And is there anything that, in terms of the study, that you think has been particularly effective for you, like outside of the classroom, outside of games, in terms of your personal study strategies?
It's personal, I guess. Really, listening to things and looking it up I found I retain it pretty well, not pretty well, but better maybe
Hmm.
than books. I guess because when I'm studying out of a book or out of like flashcards or something, I'm just sort of in study mode, I think, and so that's kind of a work thing, and you retain it as you do anything that you study. But I think for me, if I'm doing something I'm sort of interested in, then I seem to retain it better. So I retain a lot of words from just kind of watching something and, oh, I want to know what that person said, look it up, and oh, that's what that is. And then I find that I've retained it somehow without really even studying it that much. So I would say maybe, I guess immersion again is kind of what that kind of category
Mm.
that falls into. That's really helped, just being bombarded with stuff over and over again, and eventually, before you even realize it, you've kind of gotten it.
Yeah. The one thing that I always remember is when I got to the JET program, having a TV in the apartment it was basically a furnished apartment when I got to JET. And so the TV was already there, and I would just put it on when I got home from work at the end of the day, and that I think was really helpful. Both
That
watching.
same.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I had a television in my first guest house when I was in I think my first year here I was in like a share house or
Sure.
something. But yeah, I had a television. I had my own room, but we shared bathrooms and all that. But I had a television in there, and I would get home at 11:30, and I watched this. I don't even remember the name of the show, but I remember the announcer, the caster, and I would just listen to her and all that. And I actually met her like years later at a game, which is weird.
Oh nice.
But yeah, that was the same for me. Just kind of just turning the TV on and getting bombarded with words, and eventually hearing the same word over and over again and finding out what it was and getting it that way.
Okay. That's really interesting. And are you watching it? Are you really just kind of focused in on sports, or are you watching other stuff on TV too?
No, I don't really watch the variety shows as
Hmm.
much anymore, but I watch the news a lot. But a lot of that is also kind of practice for me too, because I listen to the NHK sends out this radio thing in the mornings. I listen to that, and I watch the news a lot just to sort of expose myself to Japanese that isn't sports related.
Hmm.
So I kind of watch a mixed bag of things.
Yeah, no, I think that's key. I mean, I've been doing a ton of the NHK radio podcasts recently. That's been a kind of not New Year's resolution because I started it last fall, but it's I do feel like I have more familiarity with what's going on over there, even though I'm not there right now. I also want to ask about sports writing. How did you get into sports writing? Was that something you had done in college, or did you start that right after you graduated when you were writing for the U.S. newspapers?
I started that in college after I realized I couldn't follow my sister's path of like electrical and mechanical engineering or whatever it is
Uh,
she did, because I suck at math.
uh,
And yeah, I started in college and then I did some internships, and that's how.
Great. One of my big regrets from college is not having done the university newspaper and not having written for it, because they had like a not professional level, but I would say an organized approach to it, where they would train freshmen, and you'd write a lot of different things, and then you could kind of eventually write your way into different areas of expertise and maybe even columns and things like that. Was that what your experience was like?
Pretty much, except I didn't have to like write my way in. They were looking for someone to do sports because apparently they couldn't find anyone, and the editor was a friend of mine, and she knew that I watched Sports Centers. Like I would wake up and watch the 8 o'clock Sports Center, and then watch the 9 o'clock and the 10 o'clock one, and then watch one at night. And
Yeah.
she needed someone to do sports, so she's really kind of signed me up without even telling me about it. And then they started saying, "Okay, staff meeting is here." I'm like, "I'm not part of your staff."
Yeah.
And yeah, so yeah, that's pretty much how it went for me. I just kind of got thrown into that as well.
Nice. And had you written much before that? I'm always curious about what people's backgrounds are in terms of their how they get into writing in general. Is that something you had done before, or was it really the sports angle that got you into it?
It was really the sports angle because
Okay.
I didn't really want to do it, and I had never written anything before outside of school.
Interesting. Yeah. And so what was it like starting to get published and having your writing out there?
It's weird, and it's sort of weird even now sometimes, but it was weird and fun and exciting at the same time, and you start to realize how much goes into people who write for newspapers and things like that. So I think it was fun.
Nice. Were there any writers you're reading, like other sports writers that were helpful in terms of? I mean, you mentioned the one at the Japan Times, helpful in terms of the language, but what about other in terms of writing role models and things like that?
Hmm. I read a lot of the Sports Illustrated writers, so I was really exposed to those guys. Scott Adamson, who was a writer in Birmingham when I was there, I really love his writing style, and I used to try to replicate it, and I absolutely cannot, so I stopped trying to. But he's really good. He's really good at writing stories that are just absolutely, you feel like you're next to him having a beer or something. He's just so good at getting that feeling down. It's something I wish I could do, like just have that personable sort of angle that makes you just really enjoy, what it is he's talking about or what it is you're writing about on like a more of a, I guess, less formal way, even though it's formal writing. I always really liked Bill Rhoden.
Hmm.
I always really liked Ta-Nehisi Coates when I was
Mm.
introduced to him. I read a lot of James Baldwin, although that's not a newspaper writer, but I read a lot of him in college when I was exposed to those sort of things. So it's been just there was a lot of people who I sort of read. I read a lot, and it's hard to think of all the people actually.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Getting a lot of different input is always like really critical, I think, in terms of changing up your approach, seeing what people are doing, things like that. And so, looking back at your college experience, I'm always curious, like what would you tell, aspiring sports writers? Like, what do you think you did well, or is there anything that you would do differently, like looking back? And what advice would you give people who want to do sports writing?
My advice would be to do it. It's really, uh, I guess, in a sense, for and it's not really limited to sports writing, but in a way it is. You just have to do it. Like you can learn all the things in whatever classroom you're in and listen to people tell you this and that, but until until you're at a game and you gotta write what happened, or if you're at a baseball game and you gotta figure out, oh, this game just ended right now and I've got a deadline in 20 or 30 minutes, and I've got to write a piece that makes sense in those 20 and 30 minutes and talk to people and get some quotes. And until you've been like yelled at in the newsroom for screwing something up and you know not to do that again, it's really just experience and the experience of doing it. So my advice would be to get an internship or
Hmm.
just get exposed and work. And it's also writing is a really newspaper writing, and a lot of networking involved too. So as you get out there and you work, you meet people, and those people know people, and the people who they know people, and that could also help you as you go forward.
I mean, that's one thing that comes to mind in terms of U.S. sports writing now. It does seem it's very uh, maybe personality driven isn't the right word, but like connection driven in terms of like you've got these. I mean, I would say I'm most familiar with the NBA writers, and you've got the writers who clearly have inside connections with the athletes and the front offices and things like that, and they're tweeting out draft picks and things like that. Is that something that would hold true for sports writing in Japan?
It depends. It's always good to have connections, and a lot of people, you have your writers who know people in the front office, and they will, break information, or you have your people in the front office who will give information to this certain reporter. So that does kind of hold true. I think that's pretty much across all sports writing. I don't think it's as I don't know the word I'm trying to think of, but it's maybe it's not as cutthroat
Hmm.
here as it is in the U.S. Whereas in the U.S., you have Woj bombs
Yep.
because Wojnarowski is trying to be the face, the voice of what's going on inside, and then you have Shams coming after him, and he's trying to do it too. So he's building his connections because that's how he builds his brand. And Adam Schefter, also in the NFL, that's how he builds his brand. John Morosi, who's really really good. He
Hmm.
has that's how you build your brand by being the source that people trust and a source where people know to get the latest news. You go there. It's not I don't really feel that as much in Japan. Like things leak, people break news, and it happens a lot, but there doesn't really seem to be the sort of same cutthroat mentality to it as there is in American sports writing. Now, in the political sphere, maybe there is. I can't speak to that
Got
at
it.
all, but in sports writing, it doesn't really feel like the same. People want to break stories, people want to have sources, and people want to, tell you what's going on. But it doesn't just seems to be as cutthroat here as it does in the States.
Got it. Speaking of John Morosi, is he at Fox right now?
I think he's at MLB Network
MLB.
right now. It could be
Okay.
Fox. I think it's MLB Network though.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because I think he's also with the Deportes. So we actually went to college together. We were on the same freshman floor, and that's kind of what I was mentioning when I mentioned. That's what I was thinking of when I mentioned the university newspaper, because he was like laser focused from the minute he got there. He was like he wanted to do sports writing. He did the Crimson, like wanted to do that. And have you met him in Japan?
Yeah, he's so good. He's really such a really nice guy. I met him the first time I met him was in America at one of the World Baseball Classics, and I believe I probably met him at Dodger Stadium. And yeah, he's such a nice guy. And he's just so good at what he does, and yeah, he's great.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I think we probably both really admire him for is all the work he's put in on his Spanish.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The when I saw him, he was he walked up to someone at the stadium, and I heard him telling them that he was working on his Spanish and how he was working on it. And then he just goes into he just flipped the switch and started speaking Spanish, and someone else came up, and they're all speaking Spanish together. And that's and then I've seen him recently do TV spots in Spanish, and he's so good. And he's just like, but yeah, fearless is, I guess, what you say, what you said before. And
Yeah.
he's you can see how much time he put into that, and it's just absolutely amazing. Because even now, I'm nervous even now when I speak to people. Sometimes there's a little something in the back of my head, and he dove right in. He studied the language. He studied how to speak the language, how to communicate to people, how to just operate completely in this second language. And it's something a lot of people don't even try to do. And he really grabbed the bull by both horns, and I really admire him for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that fearlessness is really key. Just knowing that, okay, especially in the beginning, I'm going to be laughed at. I'm going to make some mistakes, like, um, I mean, it's hard even to do in English, right? Like all these TV spots, I feel like, and all the announcing, right? You really have to polish, I think. And have you ever been in a position to do anything Japanese on air?
On air, I've been on television a few times on air, which in Japanese, and I there was once after the earthquake happened when the Eagles were in Chiba, and I was speaking to Kazmatsui, and I got there at the same time as a television crew, and so they were like, "Okay, you can just ask all the questions and ask him in Japanese." So I had to do it in Japanese, which was nervous, and there was also um, I think when Akinori Iwamura was here for something, I ended up being sort of the designated question asker for a pack of reporters, which was absolutely nerve wracking for me because number one, these people are now listening to me speak, which just made me really nervous. And number two, I've got to also deal with that and try to talk to him and ask him intelligent questions. And yeah, I can't do it like John does, even though I've been here a long time and I can speak, but I still get nervous doing stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's great. John, what a guy. They're super nice guy too. Just I still get emails from him every now and then. I saw him when he was in Chicago, I think in 2016, covering the Cubs. So that's really cool to hear. Yeah, I had forgotten that he had gone to Japan. I thought he might come up in this conversation, but I had forgotten that he had actually gone to Japan. That's really cool.
Yeah, he was here for the Premier 12 in 2019, and I again did such a great job covering that and talking. I saw it, and he did some interviews with players after those games, and he's just really good at almost everything he does. It's crazy.
And speaking of Japan, like when did you make the decision to come over to Japan, and what fueled that decision?
Um, I got there was a job posting, a job listing for the Japan Times, and I applied for it, and they actually got back to me after, I guess, a month or so. After I'd already gotten another job, they got back to me. So, I was 24 and I didn't know any better, so I just dropped that job and came here. I didn't really put a whole lot of thought into it.
So had you been to Japan before?
Never.
Never, but you had some interest because you'd taken that course.
Yes.
Okay, and was that just kind of like a lot of people that I've talked to, they just kind of were fueled by the kind of low key presence of Japan in like general pop culture. Is that true for you, or was there another interest?
Yeah, it was pretty much general pop culture. I was into video games, was in anime, all that stuff, and I learned a little bit more about Japan when I took the class because I had, somewhat of an interest, and the class was, I didn't really, I think I had a scholarship, and I took the class because I needed to waste the scholarship money on something because I was done with everything else.
Oh wow.
But I was still working in that city and I was going to be there. So I figured, hey, it's a scholarship. I'll just take a Japanese class. And so I did it. And I kind of got a little bit more interest from there. And I did apply for the JET program, and I was an alternate. So the
Mm,
person who I would have alternated for actually came. So I didn't get to come then. And so this opportunity popped up and I just kind of did it.
nice. I mean, to be honest, I think that it's a. I mean, the JET program's good, but I mean, sports writing in Japan seems like it'd be a lot of fun. How much Japanese baseball had you watched before you came, and how familiar were you with it?
None and zero.
Zero. I mean, had you seen Mr. Baseball, or is
Nope. Not
no
at all.
really? Okay.
When I came here, my Japanese experience was Ichiro and
Okay, got it.
Matsuzaka. That's literally it. The first Japanese baseball game I ever saw was the first one I covered.
Oh wow. Okay. What do you remember from that game? What stood out?
What stood out from that game was I got lost on my way to Kaihin Makuhari to see Chiba Lotte and the Hokkaido Nippon Ham Fighters. I'd been here about uh, at least a week, maybe two. And so I took the Musashino. I'm sorry, I took the Musashino Sen instead of the Sobu Sen or
Mm.
Tohoku Sen, whatever train it is, I forget.
Hmm.
KO. I took the Musashino Sen instead of the KO Sen. So I ended up in Nishi Funabashi, and then the train went a different direction.
Mm.
So I got lost by 3 or 4 stations before I realized it. And I got back, finally got to the stadium I went to that game because there were two American managers, Bobby Valentine and Trey Hillman. And what I remember from that game, Yu Darvish was pitching. I didn't really know who Yu Darvish was at the
Hmm.
time, but Yu Darvish was pitching. It was opening day against Naoyuki Shimizu, I believe it was, and the game was, I think the fighters were winning by 4 runs, and it started raining, and Julio Zelada hit a grand slam, and the game ended tied after like 6 or 7 innings. So my first baseball game here was my first tie game.
Wow.
I'd forgotten that games could be tied, and so it ended, and that was it.
So
So that
like
was
with rain delays, they just will let it end on a tie then sometimes?
yeah. Once I mean, there's no, they don't. It's not like in the States where
Oh,
you
okay.
suspend, come back. If the game is in and it's tied, it'll just stop and it'll be tied, and that's what happened with that game.
Oh wow. I don't think I knew that. Even like in the ninth inning, they won't do extra innings?
No, it's just
Just tied.
well, this year there's no extra innings.
Okay, got it.
A regular baseball game in Japan will end after 12 innings in a tie.
Got it.
So you have 9 innings. If it's tied, they'll play three more, and then if it's tied, then it's just tied. This year, because of COVID, and they're wanting to have the games go quicker and that sort of thing, the games are ending after 9 innings. So if it's tied after innings, it's over. But that's just the rule for this year.
Got it. Man, yeah, that's I don't think I knew that. Yeah, so I came in 2002 the summer for an internship and was taken to a Hiroshima Carp game in Okayama, I think, because that's where it was, or it was not. It might not have been in Okayama. It might have been in another city nearby, but it wasn't in Hiroshima, which I thought was interesting. Having grown up in New Orleans, we don't have a baseball team, but I got to see the A's when they came
And the
for.
Zephyrs are there, I believe.
Yeah, we had the Zephyrs. Yeah, did they? I think they have a different name now, but yeah, I don't know if we had the Zephyrs at the time.
Um,
Um, but they would have these kind of preseason games that came through. But that's what I always thought of when I was there in Okayama. But it's funny, like you've got such a good memory of that game. I mean, maybe because you covered it, I was just kind of there drinking beer with the people I was interning with. But do you think that sports writing trains your memory in a way that you can pick up on things and maybe even language more quickly?
I never thought about it, but it's possible because you gotta kind of remember what's going on and remember what's happening. I remember that game. Just again, it was a very memorable game as
Hmm.
it was my first game here. It ended in a tie.
Hmm.
You had this big grand slam that tied it up, and then it started raining, and then it was over. Although I do remember my first Central League game too. But yeah, um, maybe it's possible. I've never thought about it. Maybe it does help train your mind. But I guess that would be the same for any reporter because you
Sure.
you do get used to listening to people speak and then having to write that down either while they're speaking or remember it and write it down later. So maybe it does kind of train you to retain things.
Yeah, and even just like names, political parties, team names, like pitches, types of plays, things like that. That's interesting. One thing that I'm always really curious about is the language that athletes use, and my only real exposure to it is what I hear on the news, but also when I was on Jet, the like pep rallies that they would do, and they would bring up all the kids before whatever tournament they were doing, the whatever team sport they were doing the pep rally for, and they'd line them all up, and everyone had to say like one sentence that was like basically like I'm gonna try my best, in Japanese, seippai gambaritai to omoimasu, something like that, right?
Right.
And you hear that I think echoed in a lot of like professional sports, like the comments that they make. Um, and then it makes me think about like the comments you hear in US sports where you like I mean sometimes you get some of that language that gets recycled, right? Like catchphrases and very like set language. Um but I don't know, do you think it's different in Japan?
It's about the same. They have their own cliches. Ganbarimasu, ishokeme, all
Mhm.
that stuff. Yeah, they absolutely have their canned cliches because when they do the hero interviews after the game where they're on the field getting interviewed or on the court getting interviewed, you hear those a lot. You get better answers to better questions, as in like when we go back and talk to them off the field and you ask someone something fairly deep and they'll give you a good answer, or even a benign question, you may get a good answer. But when they're in front of the crowd and on camera, yeah, you're gonna get a lot of, I'm just gonna do my best. I'm just trying hard for the team. Pretty much almost the exact same thing you hear when American athletes speak in a lot of ways.
Another thing I'm curious about is like, how familiar are you with like the corporate aspect of sports in Japan? I know that a lot of companies have teams of their own in different leagues, even like rugby and basketball. And I know that, I mean, baseball is sponsored in a very clear way that's different from the U.S. How familiar are you with the corporate leagues, and do you have any experience with those?
I don't really cover the corporate leagues much. I know of the corporate leagues because you got a lot of players who come out of the corporate leagues and end up in NPB, or like Junichi Tozawa end up in the major leagues. Well, he was the only one. I've been to some corporate league games. I've been to the corporate league tournament that they hold at Tokyo Dome in the fall. So I'm more, I guess, casual with the corporate league. I don't follow it too much. And as far as NPB, like you said, the teams all have kind of big corporate backing, and it's right there on the Yomiuri Giants, Chunichi Dragons, that sort of thing.
Does that change the sport at all?
I think it changes the sport in that, the Giants know almost whatever they're going to do. The Yomiuri is just going to kind of write it off. The teams, I guess you have a bit of a safety net with the teams, and so you don't really see them take the risks, I guess you would say, that you would see an American team take. Like the Angels are playing right now. The Angels are in the business of, other than winning games, the Angels ownership, and they're in the business of making money and doing things to make fans come to games, to make fans spend money on games, to negotiate TV deals and things like that, and to kind of spread their wings, so to speak, with the Angels. But I think in Japan, you don't necessarily see that because they have this big corporate backing, and they don't always seem to be proactive when it comes to trying to grow the game, trying to do things to entice people to come to games in order to make money. They seem to be in a lot of ways happy to just run in place. That is changing some. DNA has been really, really good about being very proactive in trying to attract fans and trying to, I think, make the experience overall better so that they can better their bottom line. And the Hiroshima Carp have done that with trying to attract female fans in recent years. So I do think it changes it in the way that American teams are more proactive at trying to, I guess, make money is the bottom line, and do things to make money, whereas Japanese teams in the past sort of seem content to sort of stay in place, which is why, Japanese teams used to send out highlights that were geo-blocked for whatever reason. Like, don't you want people to see? Don't you want people outside of Japan to see what's going on? Even if it's not in their language, people will be interested, and they'll hear about these players and things like that. But now it's getting better. The Pacific League is being a lot more proactive with trying to promote themselves, and even some of the Central League teams are starting to do it some. So I think the biggest difference, which is it's a very long-winded answer, the biggest difference is that American teams are more proactive about trying to make money, and whereas Japanese teams were, at least up until recently, more content to just kind of run in place.
That's interesting. I mean, it makes me think of like, totally unrelated, but like the Kindle platform and what is and isn't accessible to, in terms of Japanese books. I know that Murakami, like the author that I'm just has been following for a while, his stuff I don't think is available on Kindle even in Japan, and other stuff is. It's difficult to. They're not being marketed to other markets, even though there might be an audience for it. Interesting to think about that, but
I think Avex is a good example because especially with the kind of the boom in anime in America, and it was still starting to get really big when I left, and you have the beginning and the ending songs on every anime, and they get popular, and you go on YouTube and Avex has blocked it in America, so you can't watch the video of this artist and you say, wouldn't that, I'm sure that artist would want more international
Mm,
exposure, but even on YouTube, where there's nothing stopping you from just showing this video other than Avex is like, we don't want people outside of Japan to be exposed to
mm.
this. Which I think that is also changed. I don't know if their stuff is geo-blocked anymore, but there are still instances. I think the J League may still geo-block highlights, or the zone, one of the entities may still have it where they tweet out a highlight, but you can't watch it unless you're in Japan. It's literally just a highlight from the game.
The DAZN though, that's a U.S. company, right? I know they do a lot of the mixed martial arts and stuff here in the U.S. I haven't really looked into it that much. Or they're playing with in some of the markets in Japan.
Yeah, they had a I don't know if it's still going on, but they had like an official partnership with the Giants, and they did like the Yomiuri Giants had a seasoned movie or something like that on the zone, and they show a lot of J League games and they show NPB games, and I know for some of their highlights from the J League, at least they would tweet it out from their account, but if you were outside of Japan, you couldn't see it. It'd just be blocked for some reason.
So, other than baseball and soccer, are there any sports on the rise right now? I know that like while I was there, curling would have its moment every 4 years when the Winter Olympics came around, and but and then rugby, I felt like maybe here and there when the World Cup came around, and but is there anything else on the horizon?
Mm, yeah, rugby's has a little bit of staying power. Women's soccer, there's a new women's soccer league launching this year, so we'll see how that does because women's soccer does well when the Desco
Mm.
Japan does well, really. Basketball is still trying to make its foothold, and it's doing better, and they're doing good things with the B League. So I guess basketball could be the next big thing on the horizon.
How big are the current Japanese athletes in the NBA in Japan?
Huge. You see, if Yuta Watanabe scores 5 points, it's gonna be on the news highlights that night. And although he's been doing well, he's got double digits in his last 3 games. But in pretty much whatever he does was on the news, and you go to the stores and there'll be a Yuta Watanabe jersey. And of course,
Yeah.
Hachimura is huge too. So yeah, I think here the market, if you're doing well or if you're even doing something in America basketball wise, there's going to be a market and people are going to follow because I guess some of that's probably just a pride thing as well. Look at these Japanese athletes doing really well, you know, that kind of thing.
Great. I want to kind of get back a little bit to the Japanese questions. When you're doing interviews with athletes now, are there any phrases you can think of that have been like particularly useful to you in terms of they've either made interviews gone easier or like a type of question that's been particularly effective?
Um,
Hmm.
Furikaite is a good one because you can get a decent answer out of it. That helps, and that was one of the first ones I started using to players. Um,
That's a really
hmm,
interesting one because it's forcing them to kind of like reflect in a pretty deep way that maybe is really also like concise.
right, because one thing you do learn, especially depending on the player, if you give them a yes or no question, depending on his mood or her mood, they will absolutely say yes or no and keep walking. So yeah, that phrase I kind of figured, not figured, I've heard other people ask it, and it does give you a decent answer. Ah, I don't really have any other kind of set phrases. But that's one that kind of will get an interview going because yeah, they have to think about it and give you an answer to it, and then you can sort of build from that.
Nice. So you do something like Furikaite kudasai, something simple like that, or like Furikaite gokanso oshiete itadakimasu ka, something like that.
The more simple, the better.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's because a lot of times, especially with athletes here, a lot of times they're on the move. So you've got from the clubhouse door to the parking lot, or maybe
Oh,
the bus. So whatever you're asking them, you've got to get it out quick enough to get it out and then get time to have an answer. Because in the States, you can go in the clubhouse and do various things. You have a little bit more time, but not here, at least for baseball. If you don't want to talk to the guy who's the hero of the game, if you want to talk to someone else, you've got from the door to the bus to get your stuff in, unless he stops. Which some of them, the foreign players, are usually pretty good about just stopping and talking to everyone. But some of the Japanese players, you'll just have to talk to them while they're walking.
Got it. And there'll be like a scrum around almost all the players, or can you sometimes get time alone?
It depends on the player and what he did that game. Like if you want to talk to someone who did really well, then there's a scrum. If you want to talk to a popular player, then there's often, there'll be, because the Japanese papers send out so many people. Well, they used to, not since COVID started, but a lot of times they send out just so many reporters to a game. So they just kind of send one or two guys after each player that they're trying to get, and each company doing that. So you end up with some of the guys having like 4 or 5 people walking with them, no matter who it is. So it really just depends on what the guy did that day. Like if I want to talk to someone who did something, but he wasn't like maybe the star, maybe I can get him by myself or with a couple people. Or if it's like the starting pitcher, there's going to be a crowd.
One thing that I'm always curious about is people who professionalize before they go to Japan or once they've gone to Japan. And have you had any thoughts about that? What do you think about, like, would there have been a way for you to go to Japan first before you had done the sports writing? Say your Japanese was good, and then to develop that sports writing skill? Or do you think it was easier having professionalized first?
I think there probably was a way if I had been studying Japanese in America for years and years and had built up the language. Yeah, there was a way. I don't know if there'd be a way to get into a like the Japanese paper, but there would have been a way probably for me to maybe do it. I did not, but obviously limited the limited amount of English language newspapers and English language websites, you would kind of have to get lucky, or the timing would have to be right, or someone would have to leave. So it'd be extremely difficult to do it. Because I'm pretty much here just because I got just really lucky that all the timing worked out. So it could be done. It'd just be hard. But if you had enough Japanese ability, you could maybe come here and get a job at a Japanese newspaper or website.
I've got two last questions before I've got these kind of like quick fire questions. One, what do you think blogs are still a way to break into writing in Japan? I mean, that's how I was initially connected with the Japan Times. Was I had just been kind of blogging about Murakami in Japanese and got connected with an editor there. But are there people blogging about sports in Japan on a semi-serious level?
Yeah, I'm sure there are. I know English-wise, Trevor, I I don't know how to say his last name right, Chira, but he runs the Hanshin Tiger. That's what his handle on Twitter. He runs that blog, and he's really really good at it. And I think he may have written for some Japanese papers recently, and that was I think that is off the strength of them seeing his blogs, and he's obviously fluent in Japanese, but he's really good, and he does his website really well. Deanna Rubin used to blog about a lot of Japanese like high school and college players. I don't think she does it as much anymore, but she used to. And there are some Japanese blogs too, but no, there are definitely there's a definite foreign fan community around Japanese baseball, and I'm sure there is around soccer too. And I know there is around soccer because there's a J League podcast in English, and I'm really sorry that I forget the name of it at the moment. But there's a person who blogs about the Chunichi Dragons. There's Steve. He blogs about the Chibalote Marines. So there are definitely people who can do it. And again, like I said with Trevor, I'm pretty sure he probably. I could be totally wrong about this because I've never asked him about it, but he probably got noticed for his blog, and then ended up being able to do some other things because his blog is really in depth and it's good, and yeah, that kind of thing. So there's definitely people doing it, and there's definitely a path to doing something else if you're doing it well.
It seems like one common thread through all those is that they're incredibly specialized. It seems like, does that have a benefit, you think, or give you like a kind of make it easier?
I think it definitely makes it easier because there's just not as many people doing it. And if you're doing it really well, then you're gonna get, the impact is gonna be even that much more.
Got it. And then the one other question that I remember, this comes from something earlier, is the Sharehouse comment. I actually lived in a share house when I moved to Tokyo after Jet. What are your thoughts on that? How long were you there? And is it something you'd recommend to people just getting to Japan?
No. How long did I live there? I think I was there for at least a year and a half. At least a year and a half. It was in Hachibori. Um, it was there was nothing wrong with the place itself, yeah, although there were some roaches, but I don't know. It was okay. When I say share house, I just meant we shared a bathroom, and
Hmm.
we shared a shower, which I'll even hesitate to call it a shower. It was like a porta potty with a shower in it. It's a
Mm,
portable shower more. And I remember that because my room was right next to the bathroom, which was fine. It wasn't bad or anything. And if I had to go to the restroom, it was right there. But the shower was on the all the way on the other end, and yeah, that wasn't cute when it was cold. And it used to snow in Tokyo back then, so it was some cold walks down to that shower and then going outside and then getting in that
oh,
shower.
wow.
So
So, wow. Okay. So it's almost like on that level, you're almost living in like one of those classic old school Japanese houses that does where you have to walk down the street and go to the bath.
pretty much, except it was down the hallway and out the door. It
Yeah.
wasn't, yeah. But again, it wasn't like it wasn't a horrible experience. It was fine. Um, Maybe it would have been better. Because I didn't really see my neighbors much either. I probably would have gotten more out of the experience if I was, I guess, able to make friends there or something like that.
Got
But
it.
it was really cheap. It was, it's Tokyo, so it's safe. I don't know. I guess I would recommend going to a better share house than I did, but
Mm.
um, yeah, it's a cheap way though. If you don't want to have your own bathroom or shower, it's fine.
My experience was there were, I guess, 5 rooms and 6 roommates, and there were 4 Japanese, 1 Korean, and me. And so we were pretty close, so that was good. I made close friends, but you know, looking back, I don't know. I guess I was so young, I could just put up with it, but I was sleeping on a really thin
Yep,
futon, and man,
same.
put up with a lot. I could not do it now.
The first time I got an apartment, I was just so happy to have a shower of my own again
Uh,
that I didn't have to walk outside to get to.
where did you move from Hachibori to?
when I when I first left Hachibori, I was still really new here and I didn't know anything. So I just moved to Kayabacha, which is literally the next station over.
Uh, something close and
Because
familiar.
when I moved, because obviously it was a share house, so none of the furniture in it was mine. So I just really just kind of packed all my stuff up in the suitcase and made like 4 or 5 trips walking my stuff to my new apartment myself.
Nice. I've definitely moved that way in Japan before, in Tokyo. Uh,
Had I known better, I would have moved somewhere farther out though, because that was in Chuoku. That's in like the middle of the city. I wouldn't live there again.
mm.
If I could go back and do it again, I would move somewhere else.
Well, yeah, I've got just 3 quick questions at the end that I'm asking everyone. First is, do you have a favorite onigiri?
Oh, I'm really into ume right now.
Nice. And do you have a go-to Japanese karaoke song?
I do not.
No.
I do
What
not.
about
Um,
English?
don't really do karaoke that much. I in Japanese, I can do lark honey, and I can do susume namakemono. I
Mm.
think that's Kazuyoshi Saito. I forgot his name.
Mm.
Um, There's another one I can do. Oh, My Little Girl. I can do that too. But I wouldn't really call it go-to. It's just I can probably sing those songs in Japanese.
If
so
you had to.
If I had to, I
Yeah.
would, yeah.
Nice. And we talked about your first baseball game, which was a great memory. What's something else you remember from like that very first week in Japan? So maybe before you had started covering baseball.
I remember my coworker picking me up from the airport. Or he was my coworker, and he took me because the first night I stayed at a Sakura House hostel in Asakusa, and he took me to have sushi for my first meal. And the first thing I ate was, I think it was uni, and I almost got back on the plane. I remember that.
Yeah, uni definitely an acquired taste
That I have still not acquired.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This was really fascinating, and I hope helpful for some listeners who are interested in Japanese sports, writing, and working in Japan.
Hope so.
And where can people find you online?
You can find me at whatever my Twitter handle is, at Coskrey, I think is what it is.
Great. Yeah, I'll put links to all this in a blog post.
On the Japan Times from time to time.
Yes. Great. Well, thanks so much. Hope you enjoy the rest of your week in Japan.
All right. Thank you for having me on again.
Thanks for listening. You can find How to Japanese on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and Substack. And we'll see you next week. それではまた来週.